Welcome back to Europe Now. Well, we left the city that voted Remain and have come to one of the regions that decided it wanted out. We're in the north of England, in a region that's called Yorkshire and the Humber. 58% of voters here decided they wanted to leave the EU in that referendum last year. In this half of the show, we're going to be looking at why and what they feel the future now holds for their region, which is a net beneficiary of EU funds. We're going to start here in the city of Leeds, a city that did squeak through with a Remain vote, 50.3%, one of the closest results in the country. We're going to head to visit its university. Mr. Richard Corbett, hi. Eve Irvine, lovely to meet you. So, Mr. Corbett, you are a Labour MEP for this region of Yorkshire and the Humber, a region that overall voted to leave the EU. Not an easy thing to hear as a pro-EU MEP, I imagine.
No, the main thing is that there were deep divisions on this question. Younger people especially voted to remain in the European Union. This city of Leeds that we're in voted to remain in the European Union. Other areas voted by a majority to leave the European Union, but there were very deep divisions on this question.
Indeed, the University of Leeds, you've chosen to show us, is populated with so many foreign students even and foreign EU staff. Migration really was a huge question of this Brexit vote. What do you think might actually happen? We're hearing about the idea of putting a cap on the number or putting charges on businesses who hire them. How do you see the future? Well,
the charge on businesses who hire them is an idea that Mrs May seems to have taken from Marine Le Pen in the French election, so I'm quite surprised by that. But in general, yes, immigration is an issue of concern for the wider public. But do you know that most migrants in Britain have come from outside the European Union? Nothing whatsoever to do with EU rules. EU freedom of movement, on the other hand, is two-way. There are nearly 2 million British people in other EU countries as well. And those here pay their way. They pay far more in taxes than they take in benefits and services together.
Can you see a future where that EU migration stops?
Well, it seems to be what the British Conservative government is aiming for. If they do that, especially in a hardline way, it will be incredibly damaging for the British economy, not just universities, but farming, manufacturing. They all depend a lot on citizens of other EU countries who come here, work, pay their taxes, but keep those industries, those sectors functioning.
Well, indeed, you mentioned there the divisions in society on how it voted. One of them was in the youth vote. I believe 1 in 6 students voted to leave. You've been speaking to a number of students here at Leeds University to find out what they think the future might hold. Let's take a quick listen of what they had to say to you.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hiya.
Yeah. So would you like to see Brexit stopped if possible?
Yeah, I don't think it should have happened, but it has happened. I think you'd find it very hard now to try and sell back to the people who voted leave that we're not going to leave after all.
So, but I think there's no reason why Parliament can't be involved in every decision-making process.
Obviously, the EU Parliament will have an effect on kind of scrutinising the deal. Are British MEPs going to be shut out of that, or do you get a chance?
No, British MEPs are still full members of the European Parliament until the day Britain leaves, and the European Parliament, like the British Parliament, will vote on the divorce deal and could say no to it, could also send it to the European Court saying, is this deal compatible with the treaties and the Charter of Citizens' Rights?
Macron's very pro-European Union stance, obviously. He's in favour of potentially more integration. Would that affect Britain's deal?
I don't think Macron is going to shift the general consensus there that they want to be fair, they want a close relationship with Britain afterwards if possible, if Britain wants it, but they're not going to give us privileges as a non-member that normally just go with membership.
So I'm doing my Erasmus year next year in France, and I think quite a lot of us in my department, in the French department, are really concerned about the Erasmus funding.
You'll be okay for this year. The question indeed is about the future, and we still don't know, a year after the referendum, whether the British government intends to ask to stay in programmes like Erasmus. But I'm alarmed that even now they've not said that they want to stay in the Erasmus scheme.
So, you know, a lot of young people have certain fears for the future after this Brexit vote, but a lot of British students did campaign for Brexit, many of them fearing that, you know, their future jobs were at risk. And indeed, it has to be said that a lot of industries in the EU have moved to other EU countries where salaries are cheaper, so they have something of a point, do they not?
You talk about jobs moving, but there is now a huge risk of jobs leaving Britain in order to remain inside the European Union.
This region is a net beneficiary of EU funds.
Yes.
Are people here aware of that? You know, what kind of things are they spent on, those funds?
No, not sufficiently aware, and the referendum campaign, you may remember, was dominated by this big red bus going around the country saying that if we leave the EU, we'll save all this money which can go to the National Health Service. Well, that's nonsense. Leaving the EU is going to be a costly exercise, and very few people voted for Brexit at any cost.
Well, we're going to be looking closer at the trade impact and the possible EU-UK relationship we could see in the future when it comes to finance in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to hop over to one region that is really on the front line when it comes to these Brexit talks. It's Northern Ireland. It currently has an invisible border with the Republic of Ireland. Our reporters Chris Moore and Sylvain Rousseau went to see how people are feeling there when it comes to these Brexit negotiations and what the future may hold.
Pip the dog goes on a brief excursion to the Republic of Ireland and returns to the United Kingdom just as easily.
This dog, he had no licence to cross the border, so he'll have to go to jail now. He's an illegal immigrant. We're now going to have to get a pass for our dogs to go from north to south. How crazy is that?
Farmer and campaigner John Sheridan has lived all his life where Northern Ireland meets the Republic. He remembers the height of the Troubles, a time of checkpoints, customs controls and violence.
After those bombs, very, very heavy security that left the road impassable altogether.
With the Northern Ireland peace process, the border all but disappeared. But now, in the wake of the UK's vote to leave the EU, communities here are worried about a hard border re-emerging. John's fears go further than that. He built his family's sheep and cattle farms on European subsidies, and fears Brexit will leave him at the mercy of less expensive overseas competitors. A few kilometres away, the twin villages of Belco in the north and Blackline in the Republic. Here, miles between kilometres, pounds become euros. But life depends on cross-border activity. Almost 40% of Northern Ireland's exports go south. The UK is the #1 destination for goods from the Republic, and the fear is of a return to tariffs and restrictions.
It will be determined at a European level what kind of border we have. And if you're not part of the European Union, you cannot expect to have the rights and privileges of being a member of that organisation. So therefore, there's going to have to be some sort of a border.
As the UK opted to leave the EU, 56% of voters in Northern Ireland chose to remain. The capital, Belfast, is just 60 kilometres from the Republic. The EU referendum divided Northern Ireland's Protestants. For some here, there's a fear Brexit could wake the ghosts of the past.
I wanted to remain in Europe, so Brexit doesn't. I think the country's going to come to a shambles. For starters, I was in the army for 26 years and I know what it was like. If we're going to go back to them days, it's going to be awful here.
Around 3,500 lives were lost in 3 decades of the sectarian conflict that ended in the late 90s. But the scars remain visible across Belfast. Kilometres of wall separate Protestant and Catholic neighbourhoods. Robert McClanagan is a former IRA bomb maker who spent 12 years in jail. Northern Ireland's Catholics voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. Many fear Brexit will mark a return to the bad old days on the border.
The reality is no one knows for sure, but if a hard Brexit happens and we end up with a hard border, there's a possibility of the reintroduction of armed British soldiers to patrol what is a 300-mile border.
Few here talk of a re-emergence of large-scale violence, but the tensions over Brexit prove the past is never far away. In the elections in March, the Unionists beat the pro-European Republicans, but by the narrowest of margins.
So, Mr. Corbett, you've now brought us to another city in Yorkshire. We're in Bradford, somewhere that did actually vote to leave the European Union. But tell us first, we're in a neighbourhood called Little Germany. Where's that from?
Yes, well, it's from many German traders that came here in the middle of the 1800s, merchants and so on, built this part of the city.
Yeah, and a link to that international past. Well, you've brought us more specifically to a business hub, if you like, the digital health zone or health enterprise. Let's find out a little bit more about that.
So the Digital Health Enterprise Zone is a hub, it's a community, a place that brings businesses together to innovate and develop their ideas around digital health and care. It's a £13.5 million project sponsored by the government. Brexit is going to bring uncertainties across the UK and, of course, for Bradford. At the Digital Health Enterprise Zone, we have many businesses that want to open up routes to market through to Europe and further afield. But we just don't know what that's going to mean for those businesses.
Well, this place is British financed, so any fears after Brexit?
If you look more broadly, we have European research programmes which are very important. We pool resources to get better value on complex, expensive research, not least in the medical field. What we are doing through our joint research programmes in Europe is vital for improved systems of treating people, new pharmaceutical products and so on. So tearing Britain out of that would be bad for the whole of Europe, but it'll be disaster for Britain.
So do you think this vote and the UK exit from the EU have we reached the point of no return, or could it still be pulled back in the other direction?
Britain can legally change its mind right up to the day
March
it leaves.
29th, 2019.
Indeed, if it wishes to. So that's an internal matter for British politics. There are people who say we should have a chance to reconsider or have a vote on the divorce deal, because it's all very well to vote for Brexit as a nice idea. Let's vote on it when we see what it actually entails, when we can see black on white what it would mean.
And the Parliament in London will get a final say on that, won't they?
Indeed, and if the Parliament rejects the divorce deal, it can only mean one thing: we need to reconsider.
Yeah, how likely?
Possible.
Mr. Corbett, thanks so much for your time. Well, we're almost at the end of the show, but before we leave, we're going to look to one British region that wants another vote following the results of that Brexit referendum. It is Scotland. It voted against independence back in 2014, but given the changes that could lie ahead, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says the people should get to have their say once again. We sent Hervé Amérique to find out what people there think today.
The Scottish Highlands. Coastal towns like Ullapool were built around one of Scotland's traditional resources, fishing. Last June, many fishermen who felt penalised by EU quotas voted to leave the European Union. A large part of Scotland's fish production is sold in Europe by exporters like Peter McCann. Along with 62% of fellow Scots, Peter voted to remain in the EU. On account of Brexit, he wants an independent Scotland.
The fishing industry in Scotland is best protected by Scotland, and with the context of Brexit, it definitely needs to be looked after by Scottish people, not those in London. You know, fishing isn't a priority for London or Westminster. Yeah, I welcome the fact there'll be a new referendum on independence.
Another traditional Scottish industry, whisky. The Glasgow distillery was created by Ian McDougall 3 years ago. Europe is the main export market for Ian, who believes that independence does make business sense.
The referendum on independence is inevitable. We really have no option here. We have to continue trade with Europe, and the only way we can do that is by being part of Europe and coming out of the UK.
Brexit has created a fundamental fault line that Scottish nationalists will exploit until they get what they want.
We set out in our manifesto that we would have the right to go back to the Scottish people and have a mandate if circumstances materially changed. Exit from the EU is a material change in circumstance, and I think it's quite right that Scottish people have their say of what kind of future they want.
According to opinion polls, Scotland is evenly divided on independence. When any new campaign starts, the Conservative and Labour parties will be on the no side, against independence.
The key thing is here, there is no guarantee, none at all, that an independent Scotland could actually become a member of the European Union. The European Commission has said this week that Scotland will have to make a fresh application as an accession state, and we know then that they will have to comply with the convergence criteria.
With a large deficit in public spending, Scotland would probably not meet the economic criteria required to rejoin the EU. But some sectors of the economy are growing fast. Edinburgh has become an alternative to the City of London for financial services. Joe Di Rollo and his team have assessed risks for banks for 25 years. He believes that a new referendum would bring more uncertainty.
We obviously have very important relationships with England. Most of our customers are English. Will there be trade barriers with England? Will there be a different currency? Will it introduce currency risk for us? So all sorts of uncertainty.
The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, is unlikely to bow down publicly to the pressure of Scottish nationalists and let them decide when the referendum will be held.
I hope you enjoyed our visit to the UK, looking at the mood here 1 year after that Brexit vote. France 24 will of course be following the general elections on June 8th in the UK, so join us then. But for now, that's it from us. Have a good week. Take care.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, a different take on the news.